such an honor to be joined by Marianne Williamson, 2024 Democratic presidential primary candidate. For the first question I wanted to ask, it goes back to that clip that I posted of you, which got about 600,000 views last month, where you were discussing how 100 million Americans do not vote, and how if we could access that voting block, it could change the game, really.
I often wonder if any of that stuff is realistic, like the student loan debt, the police reform, maybe just because I've become such a pessimist because of the system. You know, I just wonder if any of that stuff is realistic or is just lip service that
because they want you to think that. Yeah. Because they want you to think that. So this is the deal. The Republicans don't even pretend. But the Democrats are like, oh, just bring us in again. Let us finish the job. Bring us in again. You know, we're really trying on that. We're really trying. That's what they want you to think. They want us to think, well, I guess it just can't be done. Why the hell can't it be done? Every other advanced democracy has universal health care. Every other advanced democracy has free college. Every other advanced democracy has free child care, paid family leave, guaranteed sick pay, and guaranteed living wage. The reason it can't be done is because they are in the pockets of the insurance companies, because they are in the pockets of the pharmaceutical companies, food companies, chemical companies, big oil and defense contractors. And so they've numbed us. And they've known like, well, I guess I can't. I guess we can't do it. We're like acquiescing to that. Meanwhile, that's the way you get the fascists. Because people, you know, what Franklin Roosevelt said is we would not have to worry about a fascist takeover as long as democracy delivered on its blessings. Democracy is not delivered on its blessings. You have 100 million people who don't vote. I think for many people, it's the only way to say F you to that system. It's a dysfunctional, but I think an understandable reaction to a system that is doing nothing for them and that they know no matter who they elect, their visceral experience is that I'm still at the effect of an unfair economic system, which is policy after policy, making it easier for those who already have money to make more money and more difficult for everybody else to even survive. The American people have got to do an intervention here. That is the only way it's going to happen, is if we bring someone from the outside and say, this shit stops now.
There's so many Americans who feel, frankly, hopeless about the future and the current state of America. And that's a large part of why they don't vote. As you articulated, they don't see any reason to vote because they know that no matter who they elect, they're still at the effect of an unfair economic system where no matter who they elect, the result is still the same, essentially. And I was curious if that hopelessness that causes millions of people to not vote, does that ever resonate with you? Do you ever feel that sense of hopelessness about America, and how do you combat that?
I don't feel hopelessness, but I feel deep concern. I feel not cynical, but soberly aware that we better change things, and we better change things quickly. Or terrible consequences could occur.
Right.
Sometimes people say, well, all those millions of people who don't vote, we just need better messaging. Well, that's absurd. What we need to do is to listen to them when they tell you why they're not voting. For millions of people, it's what you said. What really changes in their lives? And I also think there's an added element, which is the only way I know to say F you to the system is to not vote. Right. So a passive level of rebellion. In some cases, it's just laziness, etc. But I don't think that's the main message here. And I believe that we need to think very deeply about why it is so many people see no change on a visceral level, no matter who is elected. We also need to face how many of those people are America's young. But we have a sclerotic political system that is very resistant to changing its mode of operation. It's playing to a small audience. It knows it's playing to a small audience. Although with the Democratic Party, I don't understand how they think they're going to win by dismissing their own young, dismissing their own progressive base. You know, a lot in my campaign, I have been speaking to Democratic clubs. You don't see any young people there. It's not the cool place to be.
Mhm.
And the Democratic Party seems to think they can afford to just ignore this. So the political party too often acts like a kind of curator and gatekeeper, when that's not the purpose of a political party. That is the embodiment of everything George Washington warned us about when he said that political parties could form factions of men more loyal to their party than to their country. Now, we shouldn't kid ourselves, however, because that doesn't mean that third parties don't have their own level of issues. So it can't be about, do you go with the party or without a party? Because even if you're going independent, there's a level of the formation of a party. We just have to transform the entire political field. And first by imagining it as what it should be, and then stepping into the vision we've created. Werner Erhard said that you can live your life one of two ways. You can live it either according to circumstances or according to a vision. The circumstances are so dire. They're so dire in terms of this country. For most people, not for everybody, but for most people, they are so dire. And the political machinery, and I can tell you this now, guys, from really, I'm speaking to you from the belly of the beast. It's so locked up. It is so corrupt. It is so without honor and integrity. It is so about the money. Now, some people say, oh, there she is. All she does is bash the Democratic Party. This is called self-awareness. This is called looking in the mirror and be brutally honest with yourself. This is don't shoot the messenger here. Whether you are a political party, a project, a business, or a nation, you're not going to go forward if you don't look in the mirror sometimes, just like us as individuals.
Mm-hmm.
This is a time of great decision and great crossroads in this country, because not only in our personal lives, but also for the society and for all aspects of it, we're either going to do some deep transformation, or I think we're on our way to what could be disaster and chaos on a level that we have not seen.
And I
Wow.
love that. I absolutely love that response, Marianne. And as I listen to you talking, I actually think about a phrase that my mom always said, which is, let's call a spade, right? She said, we don't have time to prittle prattle. We have time to wait. Let's call a spade a spade. And, to this day, that fuels my belief on the idea that a problem unnamed is a problem unaddressed. And so I appreciate you and your campaign so much for its willingness to tell those bold truths. And right now I'm currently a doctoral student in psychological health and learning sciences, specifically school psychology. I'm very passionate about equity, educational equity, but doing what I feel that we all should be doing, which is, creating or helping to create a society where all people can live boldly and unapologetically as themselves. And last year I had the opportunity to travel to DC with the National Association of School Psychology's Public Policy Institute. And there we got the opportunity to advocate for mental health resources in school, particularly talking about increasing funding for qualified teachers, school psychologists, and other individuals like that. And as we know, in America, schools are primarily funded by property taxes. Critics have suggested that this form of funding is what promotes poor educational outcomes. And you yourself have even stated that this form of funding is, you called it a passive form of oppression and therefore violent. And so I want you to expand on that a little bit and tell us about your perspectives of education and what that would look like under Marianne Williamson presidency.
Well, there's so much that you said there, beginning with the fact that an older, more mature woman is the one who said, let's call a spade, because I think that that's part of what age brings, is like, I'm not going to pretend any longer. That's the value and the beauty of age. And I think also, we talk a lot about the role of the grandmother. I don't know if your mother is actually a grandmother, but there's something about really honoring that thing that happens as we get too old to want to bullshit any longer. And also, of course, when you were talking about facing things, the famous James Baldwin line, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed that is not faced. And I think that we're living at a moment when I think that many people realize how much we have to face, but do not necessarily recognize how, if you're going to really look at those shadows, you better do it with mercy and compassion. Because otherwise, all you do is point out what we've done wrong. All you do is point out what we're doing wrong. And you don't create the psychological space for recognition of how we want to make it better, because that's what the purpose of our lives is to heal the wound, right? So now we're talking about the educational system. So what is it that we need to face? We need to face a lot of things from the past, and we need to face things from the present. So from the past, we have to recognize what the American educational system was originally designed to be. It really was a factory to create new workers. Right. That's really that's why often when you look at schools, particularly like when I was growing up, they look like little prisons. They look like little army camps because you're just, the system, whether consciously or unconsciously, people were basically trying to create people who would serve the system. And then the way the system would operate is that it would pick the best and the brightest, pick them out and say, oh no, we need you to run the system. So you get to go to the elite universities and so forth. Okay. And it became less about teaching people how to think and more about teaching people what to think. Okay. That's a lot of what we have coming from the past. And that includes the funding, as you said. We're the only country, the only advanced democracy that does so much of our educational funding based on property taxes, which once again, you pointed out that I said this is a passive form of oppression. Because that means if a child, and this is true when you look at all of the indicators. If you are a white child living in a financially privileged neighborhood, you are likely to get a public school education that is on par with the best of anybody in the world. So that shows we can do it. Mm-hmm. Right? So this is where the whole topic of intersectionality comes in. You cannot separate education from issues of poverty. You cannot separate education, therefore, from issues of race and all of the, we have to take a whole person approach. Otherwise, we're always playing whack-a-mole. Let's fix this, let's fix that. No, we have to fix the whole thing comprehensively, right? Now, so I've said throughout my campaign that the 10-year goal should be that every public school in America is a palace of culture and learning and the arts. So we know what the goal is. So we have to then approach it from, okay, that's our goal. Well, Jalen, one of my deep concerns over the last few years has been the state of America's children before they even hit school. So when you as a child psychologist working in a school, you're not only, and I know I don't need to tell you this, you're not only dealing with the psychological issues of that child, the family system, including poverty, you're dealing with the trauma that child has been experiencing many times since the day they were born. I have met on my campaign elementary school teachers. Hear me. I really want you guys to hear me. Elementary school teachers who tell me they have students on suicide watch. And I don't need to tell you, Jalen, with the work you're doing, that routinely throughout the public schools in America, we have trauma rooms. Well, what the hell's going on? That in this country, childhood is a trauma. Just childhood itself is a trauma for so many millions of children. And let's not forget the fact that there are millions of children going to school every morning saying a little prayer, dear God, may I not be shot and killed today. So we have to go back to the beginning. This is why I want a Department of Children and Youth. We have to go beyond just a Department of Education. It needs to be a Department of Children, right? If we want the America that we want to see in 20 years, what we need is to have a lot of major transfer of resources into the lives of children 10 years and younger. Early childhood, everything to me is early childhood, early childhood, early childhood. One of the first things I want to do as president is convene America's greatest minds on early childhood. And I would talk to you and ask you who some of those people might be, actually. But that will be not only psychologists, it will be nutritionists. It will be neurologists. We know, for instance, 90% of a child's brain is developed in the first 5 years. So most of the child's brain is developed before they even hit kindergarten. Right? And by the way, we need to really do this. We need to go back into utero. Look at what some American mothers are eating while they're pregnant. So, of course, about the high, maternal mortality rate among Black women. But even if, those, God forbid someone should die. But even those who live, what the experience is. I once heard a woman say at one of my lectures that she had one of her children, I think in Maine. and another in New Hampshire or something. I'm not sure I have there were two New England, and I'm pretty sure one of them was Maine. She said when she had her baby in one state, she was then visited. Someone from, an agency came by with the first two little books for the baby to make sure she had diapers, to make sure she had formula if she needed it. And how the other state didn't have any services like that. And she just talked about how much it set her up in her mothering. So I have a lot of concern about before they're even handed over to you, because what's happening to those of you who are in the field of child psychology is that you're handed so many kids who are already in trouble before you even meet them. So you're not even able to get to maintenance. Somebody just drops this traumatized child at your desk. Am I wrong?
Absolutely not. You're spot on.
So I want to be a president who works on having, on a much greater probability that by the time you're counseling that child, you can assume that the child will have at least above average level of emotional and psychological well-being.
Yeah, I think that's very powerful because I mean everything you're saying is spot on. Going to these schools and even working with some of the parents, it's wild to just hear their experiences. And I think what hurts the most about it is many times that child or that family is reaching out their hand for support, but nobody is willing to grab it to be
We don't have it
Yeah.
because we have a cruel soulless system at the moment that thinks it's all just about making corporate dollars and that there's something wrong about creating a society of greater caring. Now, I do think that we have to take a lot of personal responsibility there too. Conservatives are not wrong on that. Eisenhower said that the American mind at its best is both liberal and conservative. There are some very important issues there that we remember that individuals have to do. We have to reach out to other parents. We have to reach out. I have two nieces, both of whom were third grade teachers. Their late mother had been a third grade teacher. And this was in a kind of high-end neighborhood in Boston. And she could not believe how many of the kids had had sugar for breakfast. I mean, this was not that the parents couldn't afford something more healthy. So all of us have to take responsibility. It's not all about what the government does, and it's not all about the money, but it is about hello. Don't have children if you're not willing, not just able, but willing to really recognize what parenting has to be. And so I think there's so much in your field. And I'm sure that you and those doing the work that you're doing are having these conversations. Parenting classes. Now, my daughter lives in England. And their system, it's very interesting to see how European countries handle this and other advanced democracies. In fact, I saw something on the internet last night about Japan that I want to talk to you about in a minute. But they check up on the family after a child is born. They don't wait to hear a report. They just come in and they want to know what's happening in the house and do the best they can. And my daughter said she was nervous answering the questions. But I want to tell you guys something about Japan. I saw this on the internet. Do you know, in Japanese schools, it's so profound. Have you read much about it?
I don't think I've seen. I know that they pilot a lot of great things for postpartum for mothers. But
this was about the schools themselves, so I'm not surprised what they do for the mothers. Like in the public schools, they're teaching the kids how to be nice. They make it part of the curriculum. Being nice. I was seeing this little video of these little kids, elementary school, and they were going through the process of getting up and helping an older man on a cane if he needed do you give your seat up on the bus? And I was watching this, that they don't have janitors. That is part of the curriculum, that the children clean up the school, the classroom. Did you see recently there was that Japan Airlines flight that caught on fire on the runway when it was landing? Did you see about that?
No, I saw about the boat.
A Japan Airlines plane lands and bursts into flames. I can't remember. There was a reason. I can't remember why. And they had 90 seconds to get out or something. They had, a very, very short time to get out, and then just all flames. 390 people got out safely. All of them got out safely. And they showed this video that somebody did on their phone. They were very politely remaining in their seats. One row would get off, then the other row would get off, then another row would get off. Can you imagine if that had been American? And we would have been in a stampede. People would have died in the stampede. Get out of my way. But that kind of stuff is stuff that's taught to children. So I think that was amazing. And you could say here the traditional American thing is, well, children should be taught ethics and honor and character by their parents, but too many aren't. And I think so many of these have to do with what you're, as a child psychologist, then these kids are completely traumatized. They don't know how to live in the world. And then they just dump it in the lap of a child psychologist. I think a child psychologist needs to stand up and say no to the society. You're going to have to do a much better job. You can't just put it in our lap. And that's what I have felt in terms of doing the kind of work I do.
My next question was, I was going through a lot of the questions that I was asked on Twitter. I had put out a post saying that I was going to get to speak to you and asking for a lot of questions. And some of them were great. And then, of course, there were some naysayers saying, well, ask her why she wants to help Trump win. And I thought, oh, I'm not asking her that. And I was, thinking on that question because I saw it come up from a few different people. And I thought, in my perspective, you're doing everything you can to ensure that the Democrats realize that they're losing to Trump. Trump is going to win. I've looked at every swing state, and out of all, I believe there are 6 swing states that generally will flip back and forth from red to blue. And in every single one of them, Donald Trump is leading Joe Biden by up to 10 points. And I feel as though your campaign is a call for people to wake up to the fact that you're not helping Trump. Trump is winning right now. And that's kind of a terrifying thing. And there are a lot of people saying, well, but with all the indictments and stuff, people are going to realize, we at least need to vote for Biden because Trump. And in my view, I just wanted to say that I feel as though you're calling people to wake up and realize the fact that Trump is already winning and we've got to do something about it, whether it's Biden or they try to throw someone else in there. They need to hear what you are saying because otherwise we are destined to have 4 or more years of Donald Trump in the White House, which should be terrifying to people.
You're right. I'm not doing this to help Trump win. I'm doing this to make sure that Trump loses.
Right.
A lot of people are in willful denial of the facts that you just said. Right. The Bloomberg poll the other day said that Trump is trouncing Biden in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Nevada. That's a 3-alarm fire.
Right.
That's a 3-alarm fire. And there are many traditional Democrats who seem to think if they just close their eyes and cross their fingers, we can will it to be different. Mm-hmm. And then those forces, including the people that you're mentioning, shame someone like myself for having the audacity to say, well, I have an idea for how we can win, because that's not it. Mm-hmm. And we'll win because we're going to offer Trump a vision as wildly ecstatic and socially and politically and economically enlightened and regeneratively democratic as his is dark and authoritarian and regressive. We got to match that energy. I'm sorry. The person who is the presumed entitled incumbent does not in any way match the energy. And whether it's age or anything else, and I don't want to get personal here. He's coming on like us, and we got to come right back at Donald Trump with that same kind of. And anybody who thinks otherwise is codependently attached to the same people who gave us Trump to begin with. That's the thing. They're doing the same thing they did in 2016. It can't be Bernie. We know what we're doing, and we're telling you it has to be Hillary. Oh, really? Mm-hmm. And you guys are the ones we're going to listen to again? Not even to mention the fact that it shouldn't be their decision. It should be a decision of the people. The only safe repository for power in this country is in the hands of the people. That's why any political party establishment suppressing a robust primary is doing a disservice to us. It's undercutting democracy. And it's saying that because democracy is so important and we have to save democracy, we're going to suppress democracy in this case, i.e., if you even listen to Marianne Williamson, then you're helping Trump, which makes no logical sense. This is a primary. This is a primary. And if anybody doesn't understand what that means, revisit what you learned in the 7th grade civics class.
I saw Peter Dow posted on Twitter yesterday. I found it kind of ridiculous. I agree with a lot of the things he says, and I feel like some of them are spot on. But he tweeted just a simple tweet. All it said was, "Trump was a better president than Biden." And I thought, in what way?
That's actually a terrible thing to say, I think.
Yeah.
I don't. What was he doing? Working for campaign? I don't know. God bless him. That's, I think.
I know we can edit that question out if you.
No. I mean, you can do what you want with your show, but I passionately disagree.
Yeah.
Marianne, you hit the nail right on the head last time. And I want to share this with you, and hopefully it gives you a little hope to think about moving forward. But your campaign was the first campaign that I ever donated to financially.
Oh, thank you.
And even though I grapple with grad school and dealing with costs for that, I always make room for, being progressive and moving the needle forward. And the reason I really said, this is the candidate that I want to support. I took a class in undergrad at Florida State University. It completely changed the way I thought about things. And it was a class called Hope is a Discipline. And essentially we talked about the idea of abolition and what it looks like, how we think that is generally rooted in tearing things apart, but it's actually rooted in bold creation that starts with imagination. Our class was hinged on a quote by Marianne, who's an activist and abolitionist. And she says that, when we think about the future of our society, we should not ask the question, what do we have now and how we can make it better? But instead, we should ask the question of what can I create and imagine for myself and my community? And many of the things you said danced around and danced with that idea. And I said, that is how we need to be thinking about moving the needle forward, actually taking on true vision, actually taking on true imagination. Because like you said, they are running the same plays. And the thing about the same plays is that there comes a point in time in which it simply will not win. And so you said before that we should stop focusing, on the economy and start focusing on the people, because when the people thrive, the economy thrives and not the other way around. So what does it look like for you to take on bold imagination to support people? Just what is that? I mean, there's so many ways to go with that, but what comes to your head, like off top?
At my talk yesterday in Ojai, California, we finished it with an exercise I've done many times with audiences throughout the years. And I asked people to close their eyes and to imagine the world that they want. And that relates to the quote that you mentioned, that beautiful quote. I said, imagine the America that you want, imagine the world that you want. I said, when you feel moved to do it, I want you to say loudly enough that the whole room can hear it. I see, at that point you're seeing with your inner eye, right? I see an America in which blank. Or I see a world in which blank. And I said, if someone else is talking, please wait so that we can hear what everyone says. And it was the most magnificent symphony. I see an America in which everyone has health care. I see an America in which one person, everybody is working at a job they love and that can support their family. I see a world in which all of the rivers, all of the seas, all of the air, all of the food have been cleansed of any impurity. It was just a symphony. But we must make our imaginations active. It's like a muscle that we've allowed to wither away. And it's begun to wither because we've been living in a society based on a paradigm which sees the world through the filter of external evidence solely, as opposed to realizing the power of imagination to transform that which is happening externally. That you imagine what you want, exactly like the quote that you said, and I can see why that class changed your life. So it was wonderful to actually have that experience, to bring that experience into the event. It's absolutely true. And it's also why so many of the social justice movements in the United States have been grounded in religious and spiritual principle. Among white Americans, the abolitionist movement first emerged from the evangelical churches in New Hampshire. And many of the women who were suffrage leaders were religious Quakers. And Dr. King, of course, was a Baptist preacher. So what that's about is the fact that if you're grounded in spiritual or religious principle, you have faith in a world as yet unseen. So you don't, it's like when a pilot is flying and there's a large cloud cover, the pilot still knows the horizon is down there, just can't see it. So you fly on instruments. Faith is you fly on instruments. I know that there's not abolition. I know that there's not women's suffrage. I know that there's not economic equality, but I know it could exist. And I know the purpose of our lives is to bring into manifestation the world that lies in our hearts. So the way it looks to me, I thought that exercise we did yesterday was particularly powerful because we went there. This brings up something else. Before I suspended and then unsuspended, people would say to me, Marianne, you need to be the same like spiritual person that you talk about in that other aspect of your career. And I would often say, yeah, but then I could use terms like, well, that's the crucifixion and this is the resurrection. And now we're going to pray and bring it about. And people would say, and I said, I can't do that in a political conversation. We have a tradition that I value, myself coming from a religious minority. I understand it. We're a religiously pluralistic society. You can't go into language like that. And the kind of people who would or not, that's the Christo-fascist thing, no. But when I suspended, something has changed during that time. It's like I'm back. I know what the system has done to me. I know that I'm squelched. And right now, I'm just going to say it. Now, that doesn't mean I'm going to break out in prayer or anything like that. But neither am I going to be as afraid as I was that they'll make fun of me. The people who I have almost tried to appease by being a good little progressive won't give it to me anyway.
Right.
You're going to call me woo-woo? I'll show you woo-woo. And when I'll show you, you think I'm woo-woo? Let me tell you something. The stuff that you're going to make fun of is the stuff that would change this country.
Mm-hmm.
Which is people acknowledging that we must come from the heart because that's what we were born to do. And we must use the power of our imagination and our faith in what is possible. Martin Luther King would say that, and he wasn't laughed at.
Absolutely. And I say, as someone who I share, in Christian faith, grew up Christian Baptist. And one of the things that we accept so easily, and we'll even say, in non-religious terms, but it's this idea that, like you said, of faith. Faith is the hope of, in things that we have yet to see. And so everyone says, within so many different religious faiths, we have this idea of walk by faith, not by sight. And if we remove this aspect of religion from it, then we're saying, hey, think about what you want, dream it, and go for it, right? Those things are so similar. And that to me, when we think about this idea of what, we all have been sold and talked about of the American dream, that's exactly what it is. I'm going to think bigger. I'm going to think better. I'm going to think about all the things that I can achieve with myself, with my family, for everyone. And that's what I'm going to work toward. I'm not going to say, well, I don't have it right now. I don't see it right now. It doesn't exist right now. So that means it can never happen. And so I agree with you in that. It seems like those ideas work together, but we so often try to drive a wedge between them.
Well, it's the American progressive movement that's drawn the wedge. That's the problem because so many that's always been the progressive vision, is to believe, have faith in progress, actually. Everything that you said, those are universal spiritual themes. You're absolutely correct. And those have driven all the great social justice movements because a social justice movement, any really progressive movement, is by definition resisting a status quo view of things. But when you're resisting a status quo view of things and the status quo is so empowered by the forces of the world, money, business, politics, if you're only going to try to meet them on that level, you're not going to win. And that's why the great successes have come from people who said, I'm going to go for it, even though I can't see it. As a matter of fact, there's a minister in Detroit named Reverend Barry Randolph. And I spoke at his church about a week ago, or maybe 10 days ago, I don't know. And I was thinking about whether or not to unsuspend, because I suspended my campaign because if you only look at the evidence of the world, it's over, Williamson, get out now. And then I realized when I got out, there's something bigger here. Where's going to be the conversation about ceasefire now? Where's the conversation going to be about real economic justice? Where's the conversation going to be about the things that I know in my heart must be discussed? And a moral victory is still a victory. And radical truth-telling is a value in itself. So I asked Reverend Barry after I spoke at his church, and he does this incredible work with, he's amazing. You should look him up if you're interested. Anyway, I asked him for some spiritual guidance, and if he thought, do you think I should unsuspend my campaign? And he talked to me and said very wise and beautiful things. And then he finished, he said, in the final analysis, I want to give you a quote from Muhammad Ali. If the mission is right, the odds don't matter.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's the essence of faith. You can't let the evidence of the world stop you. Of course, I mean, obviously the abolitionists had no reason to think that they could prevail. The women's suffragists had no reason to think they could prevail. None of the people who have stood for the greater possibility. And I know from my experience running, the techniques that are used to convince you that you can't possibly achieve this, and why don't you get out of here? And we have to hold on to one another and stay in anyway.
I believe you've held on to the principle of just doing the right thing by staying in. I remember whenever you suspended, I felt, I understood, of course, logically, but I felt a bit of a void in this. Well, I guess, do I vote uncommitted? What do I do? There was this sense that there wasn't a clear right choice anymore. And I feel that now that you've stepped back in, it's like I felt this sense of peace. Like, okay, I have a clear vision of what the right thing to do is, who the right person to vote for is.
Thank you so much. I feel at peace too, and I've mentioned that to my friends in the last few days. It makes no sense whatsoever, but I'm at peace with the fact that we're doing it.
Yeah.
And I feel the same way, because I have come to, and it was a hard decision to make, but both me and my girlfriend both had talked about it, and we're really on the same page where there is no way. And I don't say this lightly. It sounds funny, but I don't say it lightly. I would much rather cast my vote into the ocean than cast my vote for Joe Biden. And I do stand very strongly on that today. And it's something that we've all talked about, or many people have talked about, that it almost seems like the DNC does not recognize that there are people who simply cannot do it, right? I can't seem to vote for them because we have this idea that comes up, the lesser of two evils. And I always say, I was actually talking to my pastor not long ago about the conflict that's going on between Israel and Gaza. And he said, well, I sit in a space and I have to ask the question, whose tears do you want me to ignore? And when I hear that, I think that same thing. Whose tears are we supposed to ignore? No one's. We're supposed to work toward this idea of peace. We're supposed to, as you often talk about, engage in radical peace building and see what that looks like for our society. And so I sit in that space and I think about those things. And it's like, if we are not actually working toward peace, then I cannot support it. And that's why I support you so strongly, because I see that in you and I believe it wholeheartedly. And so I wanted to share that.
I've been feeling that way since ever I was old enough to vote. I remember the first presidential election I was old enough to vote for was Mitt Romney versus Barack Obama. And while I detested Mitt Romney and didn't want to vote for it, I was angsty, maybe 19-year-old, pulling his signs out of people's yards and stuff. But I also, at the same time, as much as I disliked the idea of Mitt Romney winning, I wasn't gung-ho about Joe Biden. Even then, about Barack Obama. At that point, I wasn't super enthralled to vote for him either. I ended up not voting in that election. And it was just that feeling of, do I really want to vote for the lesser evil? And I think ever since I've been old enough to vote, I've felt that was a hindrance in so many people going out to the ballot box, and including myself. And I think you offer people an opportunity to vote instead of for a lesser evil. You offer people an opportunity to vote for a greater good. And
Yeah.
that's so important.
I think it's important also for your listeners to be aware that we're talking about the primary here.
Mm-hmm.
And that, because people can misconstrue this conversation and say,
Mm-hmm.
oh, you're throwing your vote to Trump. We're talking about a primary here. And
Mm-hmm.
too many people seem to forget what that means. Also,
Mm-hmm.
Jay, on that line, whose tears do you want me to ignore? I'm gonna I'm gonna be quoting that. That's really amazing. Whose tears? And I think that's a question I have for the left as well as the right, by the way, on the subject of Israel and Gaza.
Absolutely. And I want to ask as well, I want to take a shift and talk about one of your policy points that I think is quite amazing, even though they're all amazing. And I also want to acknowledge that I've said to many people before, okay, if we're going to argue policy, let's pull up policy for Marianne Williamson. Let's go to Marianne 2024. Let's pull that up and let's go to all the other websites. And yet all the other websites seems to be missing the comprehensive outline that you have. And so as someone who loves evidence, research, and science, I appreciate you for putting those things up there. But you often talk about or developing a healthcare system over what we have currently, a sickness care system. And there's many others that are in the race that I feel that have picked up that language from you as well. But you share and advocate for a system that is proactive in responding to the health needs of America. And we talked about it earlier. You mentioned it briefly. A health statistic that always surprises me is the maternal mortality rate of Black mothers, right? Often dying at three times the rate of other mothers during delivery. And so, under a Williamson presidency, what actions do you foresee that can respond to systemic health disparities such as this? And not specifically this one, but there are so many that we can talk about.
Well, there's so much in what you just said. First of all, you're right. The issues page at marianne2024.com is filled with some great policies. I really want to acknowledge Hania Jodad and Jordan Balag, who helped me put all that together. And on health is a perfect example. As we were saying before, mine is a comprehensive whole person integrative approach. We need to move from transactional to transformational policy. So we need to deal not only with how we're going to treat sickness, we also have to recognize that we have the highest rate of chronic illness of any other advanced democracy. So it's not just that we have to treat sickness, which we need to treat with an improved Medicare for all. We also have to proactively create health.
Mm-hmm.
So my plan is called the Whole Health Plan. How can you talk about health in America without talking about how many more carcinogens are allowed in our food than in other countries? Without talking about the fact that 46 of our urban water wells are filled with PFAS, those forever chemicals. Without talking about so much of the environmental deregulation that has gone on that has led to our breathing toxic air as much as we do. So I take on health from an integrative approach. My whole health plan is not just about treating sickness, but about creating more health. One item that I particularly love in our plan is the following. Most doctors in the United States have been trained in definitely primarily, if not solely, a model of allopathic, usually pharmaceutically based healing. So let's say you go to the doctor. Your doctor was most probably trained in that very Western model, and the doctor will most likely obviously diagnose you, but then prescribe pharmaceutical remedy. Now, on one hand, it's very important that we have an insurance, universal health insurance, so that you can afford it. Right now, 18 million Americans cannot even afford to pay for the prescriptions that their doctors give them. This is a very important issue in America. We're talking about between 75 and 90 million Americans who might not be uninsured, but they are underinsured. So you have a lot of Americans whose insurance will cover you going to the doctor, but it won't cover the tests that the doctor says you need. It won't cover the operation the doctor says you need. It won't cover the prescriptions that the doctors prescribe. Okay. In addition to handling that through the improved Medicare for all, in my plan, I love this. Are you ready for this? It is mandated that we have a database, and for every illness and every condition that doctors see, we have also researched What are the non-allopathic, non-pharmaceutical remedies which have been statistically proven to, if not have the same rate of efficacy, at least close enough? So it is now mandated that before you leave that doctor's office, you're going to see, well, what is the non-allopathic? What is the non-pharmaceutical remedy? And your insurance will cover that as well. So this is the kind of new thinking. That's what we need. And that's how we're going to beat Trump. We're going to say to the American people, we can start over. We can bring our public policies in line with the thinking of the 21st century. We can have a new chapter of American history. We're going to beat Trump by offering a genuine alternative.
And that is powerful. You know, and listening to that, it's like, now we're giving people the opportunity to have it in their hands, to be able to make their own decisions and to have the best information. I know the very first video that I made about Marianne Williamson, it was a TikTok. It's actually my most famous TikTok to this day. And it was myths about Marianne. And that was one thing that I really went to bat with so many people about, was this idea that, you know, our medical providers oftentimes, just by virtue of training sometimes, do go to a very pharmaceutical-based form of care. So I've been seeing a lot of anti-Marianne Williamson posts lately, and in 2020, they tried to paint her out to be some kind of whack-doodle, whack-a-nut lady, and it worked on me back then, but not this time. But I'm still seeing the same rhetoric being pushed again in the 2024 election, so let's crack it open this time. And so one of the major things, and absolute most ridiculous, is that she's anti-medicine and anti-science. And I don't think that can be further from the truth. What Marianne Williamson is saying is that if we responded to the social needs of our society, we wouldn't be as dependent on medication and as dependent on drugs. Think about it like this. How many women and children today are taking antidepressants to treat PTSD and anxiety as a result of sexual abuse or sexual violence? What if instead of those drugs, we listened to women when they reported their creepy ex-boyfriend, or they reported a stalker, or they talked about a domestic violence situation that they were in? What if instead we started teaching children in schools about consent? How many people today are taking blood pressure medications? What if instead of that, we provided healthy food and nutritional options and training to communities that have been historically disadvantaged? What if instead of that, we address food deserts that we see across our nation? These are the things that we can do, the social things that we can respond to, so that we are not as dependent on medication. And when you think about it, all medication from aspirin to Zoloft is going to have some form of a negative consequence. So if we can have the same outcome without being as dependent on these drugs, why wouldn't we? And for the second point, and this one is almost as ridiculous as the first, and it's that Marianne Williamson believes that you can just close your eyes and pray away AIDS and it'll just disappear. That is so not the case. But what we have to remember is that Marianne Williamson was doing work with people who had AIDS back when homosexuality was still considered a mental illness and AIDS was considered the gay disease. There was no medication, there was no treatment, and there was no hope for people who were suffering from AIDS at this time. And so what Marianne Williamson did was provide them with a sense of hope. It's the same way that today, if chemotherapy is not working for a cancer patient, we'll tell them, well, the cancer hasn't killed you yet. Keep smiling and keep pushing. We're not invalidating their experience. We're not telling them that you can just close your eyes and pretend and it'll go away, but we're providing them with a sense of hope where the circumstances in society are giving them close to none. And that's what Marianne Williamson was doing. And if you talk to any of the people that she worked with all these decades ago as it pertains to AIDS, all of them have such great and powerful things to say about her. So I don't know where this idea comes from. Point 3, and this one's going to be quick, and it's this tweet that Marianne Williamson put up. And she has said over and over again that it was purely satire. It was a jab at the idea that we live in a society that doesn't take extreme weather events seriously, that doesn't take climate change seriously, that won't address pollution from big oil and all of these other companies seriously. And so she just put it out there to say the same thing that we say when it comes to gun violence. Thoughts and prayers change nothing. It was purely satire, and the only reason she deleted the tweet is because people thought she was being serious. And the next point is that Marianne Williamson is extremely aggressive behind closed doors, and she threw her phone at a former staffer. And she has already said that she's never thrown her phone at anyone. And the person that experienced that has never come forward. Either way, I don't know whether it happened or it didn't happen, but what I can say is that I personally am always skeptical of judgments about a woman's behavior, because we all know that what's tolerated when done by men is oftentimes frowned upon when done by women, especially when it comes to top executive or CEO presidential positions. And so the question I really want to ask is, was she really aggressive and all over the place, or was she simply firm and passionate? So overall, I am being critical this coming election, right? I am tired of voting by the idea of who's going to be able to beat who. I'm tired of voting on the idea of, what are they going to look like on the campaign trail? I am voting for the person whose ideas most closely align with mine, because true democracy is not about voting against anything or against someone. True democracy is about voting for the things that you want to see. And if Biden can stand up and say that if I don't vote for him, I'm not black, if Biden can stand up and say that there's not as much diversity in black communities than there is in Hispanic communities, and I can pull up just these 3 flags here, and that whole argument is blown out the window. But if Biden can say those things and still be considered a top contender for this 2024 election, then so can Marianne Williamson. And as a Black American who has had relatives that have had high blood pressure, that have had dealt with the issues around diabetes and things like that, there's so many other preventative measures that we can take. There's so many other things that we can do beforehand to prevent the reliance on these drugs. Does that mean that we just say absolutely no drugs for anyone, they can never have them? Absolutely not. But we are thinking about those beginning factors, and I think that it was so powerful in your statements with that.
Diabetes is a perfect example of the both and. It is absolutely unacceptable that 1.3 million Americans ration their insulin. My mother died of diabetes. Her mother died of diabetes. My uncle died of diabetes. My niece died of an insulin overdose. So I understand about diabetes, and I understand how horrifying it is that any American is having to ration their insulin. And that's why you need to have a universal health care, Medicare for all type program. And not but, and as you just said, it's also true how much the American diet contributes. The average American diet contributes to the onset of diabetes.
Yeah, definitely.
So it's both and. You need healthy food, you need healthy lifestyle, and you need the medicine. It's not an either or. I remember during back during the 80s, everybody was talking about alternative medicine. And then everybody said, well, is it really alternative medicine? No, it's complementary medicine. And then the language finally landed at where it belongs, integrative medicine.
Yeah.
There's no either or here. There's both and.
Yeah. And
it all starts with that vision, as you were saying, of creating, imagining, and then stepping into the vision with the creation, the intent to create a healthier society. And that's what politics should be.
Definitely. And I know when I worked in a pharmacy for a little while as a pharmacy technician, and another experience, I know a lot of times on the conservative side, they'll say that it's schools that are indoctrinating and changing people's mind. No, it's our lived experiences here in America, because I saw so many parents, and I had a parent that came up and was deciding whether or not they were going to get their blood pressure medication or antibiotic for their child. And it's like, whoa. And I'm here in this space, I'm 18 or 19 at the time, and I'm sitting there like, I don't know what I can do. And it breaks my heart to see this parent have to make a decision. Do I sacrifice my health for my child, or do I, which one? And that is a decision that I don't think that we should have to make here in the greatest country in the world.
Not only is it a decision we should not have to make, as Americans, we need to find the place inside ourselves. It is absolutely unacceptable. It is so beyond should not happen. It is unacceptable that any parent in the richest country in the world is put in a position to make that decision. And we've got to change it. It's the characterological aspects that are necessary now. Are we willing to stand up? Are we willing to have the courage, the bravery, the intentionality to say, no, that's not going to happen here anymore. It's not going to happen on our watch. We're going to change this.
but there is a certain level of propaganda that's been so successful. Unfortunately, my aunt, she's approaching 60. She's had 2 heart attacks, and she doesn't have health insurance. She works for a grocery store where she makes less than $20 an hour, and she's of this mindset from what she's seen from conservative media, et cetera, that well, no, it's not good for us to have universal health care. It'll put you on a waiting list and you'll never receive care, and then you'll just die. And there's just so many, there's so much rhetoric that's been sadly effective on people, into where they're celebrating the American healthcare system. Meanwhile, they don't have health insurance, while they've got really serious pre-existing conditions, and they still say, well, it's not any better in Europe but when you speak to people from Europe, from Canada, they wouldn't trade their healthcare system for the American healthcare system in a million years. So
now, nobody's is perfect. You look at England. What do they do that we want? What do they do that we don't want? Look at Canada. What do they do that we want? What do they do that we don't want? Look at Germany. Look at New Zealand. And we are different. And nobody is saying that any country, including Canada, has the perfect way we're going to do it. It's that we're going to do it, and we're going to check out the way all kinds of people do it and come together with the best of ideas. Because there is one element of what your aunt said that's true. Well, but we want to, there are people who would say about Canada's system, well, once you're already really sick, they'll help you. But if you want to just get a test before to see, they won't. Well, okay, we got to fix that. We've got to make sure. And that's why the countries that have the hybrid of the personal, of the private and the public, the point is, none of those arguments are an excuse not to get to the work of making it happen. That's the problem. They just, like you said, it's propaganda. All those things are said to just make you think. And of course, there's the socialism. Anything that has to do with the government caring about the common good. That's the first principle. The first principle is that it's the role of the government to broker the proper balance between individual liberty, which does include economic freedom, and a concern for the common good. But the regressive right today would say anything that takes care of the common good is socialism. They would call Abraham Lincoln a socialist, because he said of the people, a government should be of the people, by the people, and for the people. They would call that socialism today. So we really need to remind your aunt that whatever problem Canada might have, one thing they do have is that every single person gets health care. So why don't we take the best of what they've got, and any area where maybe it's not everything we want, tweak it.
Right.
And use a little imagination to do so. Yes, I love those ideas, and I like how it acknowledges the interworkings. It's not just a simple, hey, we're just going to do it this way, but we're going to collaborate. We're going to work with each other, because these ideas are bigger than ourselves, right? It's about a future and everything else. I do want to ask, because I think I've been annoying my family, but rightfully so. They know who I am, about you, Marianne. And I have a link of videos I put together. I say, watch this video, look at this, do this. And it's really changing a lot of their thought process. And most of my family, or a lot of them, are in Florida. And Florida has now been deemed the most expensive place to live. And last year was the hottest summer on record for Florida. And this is, of course, not just for Florida, but it's for, places around our nation. And this led to a lot of the utility bills of my friends and families just absolutely skyrocketing out of control, during this summertime. Now, a lot of times when we think about this idea of climate change, people say, oh, it's something that we have to think about in the future. We work slowly towards it. We're going to make this progress. And, those ideas suggest that actually, no, we shouldn't be moving slow on that, because if you have people, especially in Florida, where there's already a housing crisis, that's struggling to be able to pay their housing bills, and now we have an environment and climate that's out of control, that's forcing them, to pay higher utility costs. All of this burden is falling again on the people. And so I want to ask, what is where do you find yourself in what seems to be this endless pit of climate change action and conversation?
It's interesting, because a lot of those people talking about the high utility bills, that will all be different when we have the massive development of solar energy, when we have the massive development of wind, when we have the massive development of a green energy grid that is necessary now. Excuse me. not only will we, by so doing, create millions of jobs and a more powerful and expanded economy, we will also be creating an economy on the other side of it that is a green economy, healthier for the environment, but also much, much, much cheaper for the consumer, which is why it's not only the fossil fuel extraction companies that are resisting this, but people like many of the utility companies, because they know when we make this shift, right? And that's why we have to recognize that for literally, we're paying for it with our lives. This refusal to begin a new chapter of American history. We are paying for this with our lives. We are paying ahead with our children's lives, with our children's children's lives, who do stand a probability of there becoming a heat so great that entire swaths of continents become uninhabitable, mainly in the global south. We're talking about implosion then of food systems, implosion of economic systems. What could be hundreds of millions of people become climate refugees. So we need to be ramping down fossil fuel extraction. Right now, we are continuing to ramp it up, whether it's a Democrat or Republican president. Now, what President Biden has done is he has overseen healthy investments in green energy in the Inflation Reduction Act, and he is to be commended for that. However, him calling himself climate president because of that is completely disingenuous, because even though he is promoting healthier investments in green, he is also investing heavily in dirty. He has given more oil drilling permits than even Trump did. And of course, he okayed the Willow Project. Now, there's another, even more dangerous LNG project that he was going to approve, and environmental groups have influenced him to put that on pause. So what I think is that we need a mass mobilization for the accomplishment of a just transition from a dirty economy to a clean economy. And we need to go about it now. Now. Like you said, this incremental approach, we're moving too slowly. The way we're going now, we're still headed towards the iceberg. We'll just sit there a little bit later date and at a different angle.
That's really powerful. That's really, really powerful in that. And it's something that I don't know if people really recognize, and hate to sound morbid, but like the impending doom that means or that looks like for us. But I think that again just adds fuel to the fire and the passion that it's time for us to, move differently than we moved before, to vote differently than we moved before, to think differently, to love differently. All of those things I think are so important, especially in this current voting season. I want to take just a little lighter note just to hear from you. And I know you often talk about this idea of serving women and children. And I think that it's powerful in and of itself, especially as someone who is committed to seeing the growth, well-being of children and families. But where does that specific interest or investment for you come from? And why do you think, or how do you think that it will impact the future of our country?
Well, I am a woman and I am a mother. When our institutions were developed, women, like Black people, were not factored into the conversation at all, neither our well-being nor our voices. And all that's different now. And we have to ask ourselves, what am I going to do with my voice now that I have it? And I believe, as a woman, that it's important not only that I stand up for other women, but also that I stand up for our children. My mother used to say that the primary responsibility of a woman is to take care of her children and to take care of her home. And when my mother used to say that when I was younger, I thought my mother was very not with it and regressive and, oh, mommy, that's just uncool. And then I became old enough to realize she was absolutely right. It's just a more expanded version. It is the main responsibility to take care of our children, but every mother's child is one of our children. That has to include children on the other side of town as well. That has to include the children on the other side of the world as well. And also, I think my mother was right about our responsibility to take care of the home, and realizing particularly the home we all share, which is the earth itself. So to me, the invisibility of children, particularly I understand women understand invisibility. We understand, and what I've experienced with this campaign has been shocking, shocking. Gloria Steinem said misogyny is an invisible sport, which I thought put it perfectly. Children are invisibilized too often. Children are erased too often. Their needs are neglected in the decisions about public policy, whether it has to do with carcinogens in the food, GMOs, environmental issues, the water that our children drink. You know, there was a movie. Have either of you seen the movie that Michael Moore made called Where to Invade Next?
No, I love Michael Moore, but I haven't seen that one yet.
It was several
Sure.
years ago, and the title is very misleading because it makes you think it's something about military, and it's not at all. It's about mainly educational systems around the world. And I remember a scene that was what little children in France eat at school. I mean, here in America, even when we have, somebody was talking to me the other day about even in schools where they have, okay, every child gets a hot lunch, but look at what they're eating. It's nice that they've got food, and it's nice that it's a hot lunch, but my God, is anybody thinking in terms of nutrition here and what is healthy? So to me, I cannot be true to myself and ignore any of this, and also ignore the ubiquity of the problem. We're talking about millions and millions and millions of American children whose nutritional needs, whose health needs, whose educational needs, or economic prospects are simply not taken into account by a system that is predicated on the perpetuation of a permanent underclass and only sees those kids as the next version, the next generation of them. That's unacceptable to me as a woman and as an American.
I'd be curious to see what the kids are eating in France. Is it escargot, snails, and frog
so
legs?
great. Yeah, go look at the movie. Definitely look at the movie. Yeah, and I think, Jalen, you would be really interested in this movie, and also try to find that internet thing about little Japanese children at school.
Absolutely. And it's powerful because even when you think about it from that context, you can think about how if we were to say to ourselves, hey, these children deserve, first off, I think it's ridiculous that it is a talking point or a debate on whether or not children should receive free school lunch. I just don't see why that's still even a topic that we have to decide on. But once we get to the point where we decide, yes, they do deserve that, and what is it that they're going to have? Imagine what we can do with our local farmers, especially as you know, being here in Texas, we have a lot of local farmers that, you know, work really hard. And we oftentimes say and believe that farmers are like the backbone of this country. And so imagine what we can do for them, you know, being able to source locally grown vegetables and fruits and other nutritious foods from them to the school system directly for, you know, for our students and for our children. And I think that is how we begin to look at what do we have now, but also say to ourselves, how can I engage imagination to really be able to create something for myself and my community? And so I love your take on that.
Well, my take on that is what you just described as a situation where the rubber meets the road. On the one hand, you described a possible solution, and who in their right mind wouldn't say, oh my God, that's such a great idea. Local farming, schools, blah, blah, blah. Okay, there's that. And then there's the lobbying power of corporate food companies, which is big food, right? Mm-hmm. Who make a lot of money on their contracts with the public schools. Who go, no. Remember what blowback Michelle Obama got when she just wanted to.
I was about to say Michelle Obama.
Have a vegetable garden at the White House. Oh, no. We're not going to have any of that. Hello? Mm-hmm. But although when Melania did it, there wasn't. So I don't know. I was kind of confused by that. But the point is, here are all kinds of solutions. You could look at the food. You could look at the air. You could look at education. You could look at so many areas. We've got the people who know how to provide the solutions. Unfortunately, there's a disconnect because the people with the solutions are over here, and too often the people with the power over here. And people with the solutions don't have the power. And the people with the power too often aren't supporting those solutions because the people who are causing the problem are their donors. And the situation you just described is a perfect microcosm of that. And you multiply that by every single sector in our society, and that's what we've got to deal with. And it would help to have a president who sees it for what it is and is willing to resist as much as possible. the forces, mainly economic and corporate forces in this country, that are obstructing real solutions when they do not serve their bottom line.
Absolutely. And Marianne, I want to ask one question as well, and it's one that I don't believe that I've seen a response from you for, not necessarily that you didn't respond, but simply because the question wasn't asked. And it's one that I think about often, especially as a Black male. And for decades, in this country, we have data from all over that reflects negative outcomes for Black Americans. And these outcomes exist within education, within employment, healthcare. However, one sector that I think is continuously at the top of the list or at the front of the conversation is the criminal justice system. So today, I know the research is forever fluctuating, but some of the data reports that, Black Americans make up about 13% of the country, but 40% of our prisons. And then we also see data that reflects Black males being shot and killed at higher rates than other groups. And so what role do you believe that a president plays in this disparity, or what role do you hope to play in addressing this sort of disparity?
Obviously, it's a multidimensional problem. When it comes to electoral politics, you need more than a better president. You need better congresspeople and senators, because a lot of this has to do with the appointment of judges. A Black person in America is given, on average, 20% longer prison sentence for the same crime. But what you saw with Obama, what you've seen with Biden, sometimes even when they're trying to appoint more progressive judges, if you have more conservative law and order type people in Congress, those appointments will get blocked. And of course, if you have a Donald Trump in president, he's going to keep appointing those judges. So that's number one. And that has to do not only with the appointment and then the confirmation of judges, it also has to do with the appointment and the confirmation of an attorney general. Right. So that's number one. Number two, Black and white Americans use drugs roughly at the same rate. But obviously, you don't have police raiding white neighborhoods to say, are there any drugs here? Right? Almost half of our federal prisoners are nonviolent drug offenders. One of the things I think we need to do is to end America's war on drugs, because a lot of those people who are in prison for nonviolent drug use should be home raising their children, and the fact that they're not home raising their children is what contributes to the problem of the school psychologists elsewhere, et cetera. In terms of police reform, we've got the rot is really deep and dirty here, obviously, even to the point of serious infiltration by white supremacist groups. It is at this point obvious to all who care to look at it. As president, I would call Cory Booker. We couldn't even get the George Floyd Policing Act passed, but we need to keep trying. So I would call Cory Booker and Tim Scott into my office and say, we're going to order in food because we're not leaving here until we have a nonpartisan. We have got to get this started. I also think, Jalen, and I'd like to hear your opinion about this. I think one of the reasons that Democrats are in trouble for 2024 is that not one, a serious police reform piece of legislation has been passed, even though Black Lives Matter was the single largest protest movement in the history of the United States. Americans are not stupid. We've seen with our own eyes. It's on video. We've seen with our own eyes. And at this point, I think there are, we have to come out of our silos. This is not about left versus right. This is about people of conscience. And how many Americans, on the right as well as the left, looked at certain videos and said, why do you have to shoot him? Mm-hmm. Why do you have to kill him? I mean, they just jump to lethal force in some of these situations, not only in terms of, we're seeing some convictions now, but the situation is so bad. They're doing with policemen. Even you see this with the Breonna Taylor case. They're doing with policemen what the Catholic Church did with priests who were known pedophiles. Oh, just move them to another neighborhood. I mean, it's extraordinary to think that someone who was involved with the Breonna Taylor shooting is now working in another police force. So these are the kinds of things. I know, isn't that just extraordinary? So there are so many, including if you look, for instance, at the way they train police in a country like Germany versus here. Here, the education of a police person is much shorter, and the issue of lethal force is not treated with the level of reverence for human life that should be. You see how in other European countries, you see how often the educational period is much longer and much more focus on de-escalation and much more focus on ways to stop a person's ability to create harm without killing them. So we need serious re-education. The problem is a lot of those things cannot be determined on a federal level. We have many, many thousands of police forces. So this is a serious problem, but we've got to go into it really with much greater intention to actually fundamentally change things, because everybody can see what's happening now. You have American mothers, Black mothers, who are literally afraid to say to their sons, go to the store and get me a pint of milk. Unacceptable. And this is an example of why I wanted to unsuspend. We're talking about things that must be discussed.
One thing that you said, which kind of blew my mind, and I don't know if I heard you correctly, did you say that about half of people who are currently incarcerated in prison are for non-violent drug offenses?
Yeah,
and then when I think about that, and then the fact that our prison has become this industrial privatized complex where private companies are making so much money off the incarceration of about half of those people are nonviolent drug offenders.
I think 46%. I said almost half. I think it's 46%.
That blew my mind. Well,
and
I didn't know that.
When I was in college, there were 300,000 people incarcerated in the United States. Today, there are 2.3 million. And when I was in college, it's when Richard Nixon initiated America's war on drugs, calling drugs America's public enemy number one, which it was not, and he knew it was not. We spent $1 trillion. It has certainly not solved the problem. It has exacerbated it, if anything. Gabor Mate says it's not a war on drugs, it's a war on drug addicts. And for the $100 billion that we're spending every year right now, if we decriminalize, but with harm reduction, you have to do it well, you have to do it smart, then we could take a fraction of that money and fund a world-class network of recovery options. Most addicts would like to get sober, right? And also that would undercut the problem of the drug cartels because you're taking away a lot of their black market. And then also it gives us the bandwidth to put our resources where we really need to. And that, of course, has to do with fentanyl, which is a very real threat.
Yeah, and I so many things I want to say just quickly on that, especially that ending one. We have had several overdoses of students in the school district that I am in. Thankfully, most of them have not led to death of that student, of that child, really. But still, it goes to show the importance of just being active, of making sure that we're responding to the needs of people. And you mentioned, about this idea of voting. Voting is so important in my family, and it's because my grandfather, he served in the military for about 25 years. And then when he went to register to vote, when coming back, he went to register to vote, and they sat a jar of peas on the counter. And they told him that he can register to vote. Sure, you can vote. Just tell me how many peas are in this jar. And year after year, he was denied that right to vote until finally something happened and shifted, and he was able to secure his right to vote. And he instilled it so strongly.
That's why the Voting Rights Act was so important.
Exactly.
That's what the Voting Rights Act in the 1960s was all about, with Johnson and Martin Luther King. And then the John Roberts Supreme Court started gutting the Voting Rights Act, and that's why we have all the voting suppression issues we have today.
Absolutely. And I think that that brings me to one of the points that I was making. When we talk about a lot of these nonviolent drug offenders, a lot of them are currently carrying felonies as a result of that. And I know in Florida some years ago, I can't remember the exact year, we had this big push and it was put into the hands of the citizens, in the hands of Florida voters to say, should returning citizens, people coming home from prison who have felonies, should they be restored? Should their right to vote be restored? And overwhelmingly, the citizens of Florida said, yes, they should. They should have the ability to vote after, formerly being incarcerated. And then we see the Florida legislature move the goalpost and say, well, your court bills have to be paid in order for you to be able to vote. And then when, activist organizations come in and say, we'll make a donation to pay it. No, they have to pay it as the individual. And so I say that to say that there are thousands of people who have felonies, and because of that they've already done their time, they've already reconciled for those things, they don't have the ability to vote. What's your thoughts on that?
So let's talk about what that's really about. And then actually, guys, I'm going to need to go because I have another event I have to do. Let's talk about that for a moment. First of all, it should be a sacred principle of justice in this country that once someone has paid their debt to society, it is paid in full. Once someone walks out, if they are released because they've either served their time or they've released because the appropriate agencies have granted parole, then that's it. In that moment, you're back. And I think that that's also an important psychological factor for people who are in to recognize what I have given up and what I will retrieve. That's number one. Number two, isn't it interesting that the people of Florida, I see this all over, the people of the United States are not the problem. Martin Luther King once said the Congress of the United States is, the people of the United States are more compassionate than the Congress of the United States. And this, you're talking about the legislature in Florida. The reason they don't want that is because they know how many of them are Black and would probably vote Democratic. It's pure racism, pure politics, and pure voter suppression. Just a form of voter suppression. Ooh, they probably wouldn't vote on our side.
Yeah.
That's how dirty it is, guys, but let's make it better.
I have one closing question. You have time? I think it'll be a good closing wrap up. Okay, so I would say, we are at such a pivotal point in America, and with the sheer amount of polarization, I have often questioned myself whether my job is to keep America from falling apart or be ready with the tools to rebuild once it does. What do you have to say to voters who may feel the same way, trapped somewhere between hope and hopelessness?
We have to be both death doulas to a world that's passing away and birth doulas to the world that is struggling to be born. We are in a period of decline, and we have to be people who wisely and compassionately work with what is, knowing that if that death of one world is not fostered appropriately, it will include chaos and violence and pain and suffering that we must respond to. So yes, one world is falling apart, and we have to do everything we can to be conduits for a nonviolent, peaceful transition to a better world. So we have to be involved in both. There's no, well, is it falling apart or is something new being born? Both are happening. And we have to have a perspective. It's not enough to just treat the symptoms of the old. We have to also be giving birth to the regenerative, revitalized possibilities. Cynicism is just an excuse for not helping. In the Jewish religion, the old saying, rabbinical saying is, you are not expected to complete the task, but neither are you permitted to abandon it. It's painful to be alive in this moment, but it was painful to be alive during the days of slavery too. It's painful to be alive during the days when women were not allowed to be to vote. It was painful to be alive as a worker during the Gilded Age. It was painful to be alive in the South during the years of segregation. We can't use that as an excuse. this like pseudo sophisticated, you think you're too hip to participate in making it better because you know how it's really going down. Well, excuse me, those of us who are trying to make it better also know how it's really going down. That's why we're doing what we're doing. We have to not coddle in ourselves or each other. The sense of I'm a victim, I'm too wounded, I'm too traumatized. We all need to toughen up. And we need to ask each other less, how are you today? Are you okay? And we need to ask more, what great thing are you trying to do? And how can I help?
Beautifully said. Amen. Lastly, I just wanted to say my mother absolutely adores you. I believe she introduced me to your work via Oprah Winfrey, but I was probably a teenager. And so I've been such a massive supporter and fan of your work and your books and everything for a long time. And this is kind of a little mini dream come true. So love for me, love for my mother, and just so much gratitude.
First of all, tell your mother I said hi.
Oh, I will.
I meet so many Gen Z generation who grew up with mothers who read and wrote the kinds of books that I've read and written. It's really something, actually.
Yeah, she is so proud of me for being able to hold a conversation with you. She was like, I can't believe you get to speak with Marianne Williamson. That's so amazing. I love her.
Yeah. You tell her she did a great job. And,
okay.
I much appreciate talking to her son. I feel like you, Jalen, I think that you and I sort of, we need to go back sometime where Kristen, you enter the conversation a little bit more.
Okay.
Yeah, I also thank you so much just for taking the time. Marianne, I mean it when I say it from the bottom of my heart. I am with you to the very end. You have my vote in all capacities, and every space that I'm in, I'm bringing it up, I'm talking about it. And my girlfriend and I have a running joke in our house. Anytime we'll say like, oh, anytime we say something needs to change, we'll use the quote you said, well, good luck with your green juice, to basically comment on the idea that there's so much more at play than just those small changes. So I thank you for everything that you're doing, and it was quite an honor.
Now, you mentioned Texas. You're in Texas?
Yeah, currently. We both are in Houston, yeah.
You're both in Houston. You know, my home born and raised.
Yes, I passed Bel Air High School on my way to the orthodontist.
Yeah, that's where I went, to Bel Air High School.
Oh yeah, I've seen your Bel Air High School photos. It's so adorable. Yeah, I don't know how they found those, but it's so cute.
I wish that I had time to go there before Tuesday, but obviously you're a Super Tuesday state, and really appreciate anything you can do to get the word out in Texas.
We'll be there. We'll be doing everything that we can. So as long as you're in, I'm in. 100%.
Thank you. God bless you both. Thank you so much.
You too. Bye, Marianne. Thank you.